For a really long time, I regarded Skyrim as a game that was a decent foundation but fundamentally underdeveloped. For any strength it had, it was undercut by the constant need for mods to finish out the systems within the game. Perk tree overhauls like Ordinator or Adamant, combat overhauls like Wildcat. If there's a system for it in Skyrim, somewhere out there is a mod to improve it. These mods always felt required to me, and were evidence of the age-old claim that Skyrim is incredibly wide and frustratingly shallow. And while I don't disagree with that, I've recently realized I wasn't giving the game full credit, and that realization starts with a man named Joov. Joov is a content creator here on the platform that primarily specializes in challenge runs in Bethesda games. Fallout, but no leaving this island. Skyrim, but I'm stuck to the road. Fallout, and trying to build a home in the glowing sea. You get the point. The challenge that matters here today is a video from back in April of last year, wherein Joov adapted the concept of an Ironman playthrough from Oldschool Runescape into Skyrim. For those uninitiated with escaping of runes, an Ironman playthrough is a set of restrictions that you can place on your account, wherein you cannot trade with other players or use the in-game auction house. There's a few different varieties. Hardcore gives your account a single life, Ultimate takes away your ability to use a bank, that kind of stuff. Joov took this format and made a version intended for Skyrim with much the same vibe. Permadeath, no storing items, no vendors, no looting bodies for equipment or consumables, and your only enchantments are those that you can disenchant from non-unique quest rewards. It seemed a neat idea, and I was having a good time watching until I got to a point in the video where I watched Joov make a potion and I thought to myself, oh, that's funny, I've never made a potion before. And then I ran to my computer to start Skyrim. Now, let's be clear for a second, I've probably made a potion before. I have hundreds of hours in Skyrim. I would be shocked if I hadn't at some point taken some flowers and some wheat and mushed them into a paste. What I really mean is that I've never valued the system for making potions before. I've never gone into a session of Skyrim intending to use alchemy. I've never started a new character thinking about the benefit that system will bring that character. And I honestly think the reason for that is pretty simple. I've never needed or wanted to. And alchemy wasn't a lone system in this regard. There are a lot of systems in Skyrim that I routinely neglect because I either find them tedious or unnecessary. Systems that range from secondary at best to I don't even know why this exists. Systems that I would never use or rely on. But what if I did? What if the rules of Skyrim were changed so that I had to? What would the game look like if these elements and systems I always overlooked were suddenly the most valuable systems the game had to offer me? Well, that would be the point of the video, I suppose. Over the course of a few attempts, I adapted and amended the rule set presented by Joov into a format for myself and gave it a try. The changes I made were pretty simple. I kept the permadeath, kind of, we'll talk about it. I kept the lack of vendors and looting of equipment and consumables. I declined survival mode, but I did use mods to give my character a random start and strip them of all of the normal starting spells. I kept the same basic rules for enchanting, plus a little flair we'll talk about later, and I also made the call that the only place I could do any kind of storage would be a player-built house from the Hearthfire DLC. So, how did it go? My relationship with alchemy has always been pretty neglectful, and I don't really blame myself for that. With the game giving every character a healing spell by default, making potions accessible at shops in every town, and basically filling every dangerous locale with at least a few of them, there weren't really a lot of places where I even considered that making my own potions could be worth my time, especially considering the hassle of running around the world and collecting all of the ingredients I would need for them. It seemed like a poor use of time, so I never dedicated time towards it. Now, obviously there's more to potions in Skyrim than just healing. There's magicka and stamina, but I never really felt any pain from letting those recharge at their own pace. There's poisons, which, given that they only apply for a single hit by default, always seemed more like a whole lot of menuing around for not a whole lot of value, and there's temporary buffs too, like potions that increase your damage with a weapon type for a set amount of time. The main problem for those is that I've just never put too much value into temporary effects. I don't enjoy the micromanaging, the set time frame to complete a thing in, I don't enjoy the idea of an effect wearing off while I'm in the middle of using it, and most critically, what if I need that potion later? I should probably just hold on to it until, oops, I've beaten the game and still have like 45 of them. You get the vibe. Here's what changed though, with this playthrough. Under the rule set I played with, I had no starting spells, no access to healing. These little blue flowers would be the basis of my salvation and would remain as such even after finding restoration spell tomes in the wild. And because of this, I've made more potions in the last 2 weeks just playing around with this rule set with my live stream audience than I have in the previous 13 years of playing this game. This meant that I was aware of my character in a way that I never have been before. So much thought went into keeping this stupid idiot alive, an amount of attention I have never paid to basically any other character in any other game, and it all started with alchemy. Every single quest, and everything that wasn't a quest, was always preceded by an alchemy-based vibe check. And it wasn't just me checking my pockets for how many potions I had, I started counting up the total banked health that my collection could offer me. And this is when I also started to appreciate alchemy as a skill, not just a mechanic. Because getting to see my banked health go from around 200 to over 1,000 in some instances inspired a level of bravery bordering on fanatical as my potions got stronger as my skill got higher. And if alchemy was just good for health, honestly, I feel like I would have gotten my money's worth, but I actually got so addicted to those temporary damage buffs as well. Having the chance to gain 60 seconds of what essentially felt like superpowers became a core element of my gameplay. And while I thought that I would be annoyed at the micromanaging element of it all, it actually felt pretty seamless. And it turns out 60 seconds of game time is a lot longer than I had thought, and popping a new buff on when one was expiring was really simple. It eventually got to the point where I was putting my 2 main potions on hotkeys in my favorites menu so I could use them without interrupting combat or even opening a menu. There's a lot more I think I could say about my newfound appreciation for alchemy, like how I walked around with a rock joint for 5 hours because I couldn't figure out a cure disease potion because I've never needed to make one before, or how I stopped fast traveling so much because suddenly walking to my objective meant finding important alchemy ingredients, but I think I've talked enough about alchemy and its temporary buffs, so let's talk about something more permanent. I think smithing becomes the natural second element to focus on in this rule set because we have to make everything ourselves. And this actually involved me in a full chain of actions that if you told me you did on a normal part of your everyday Skyrim gameplay, I don't think I would ever believe you. Because it's a style of gameplay that isn't just upgrading your gear with the relevant ingots, it's going into the mines yourself and collecting the ore there. It means keeping track of what ore respawns in which mines at what time, and it involves more than just gathering up some iron and throwing together your first set of armor because you'll need to routinely invest in upgrading your setup. But in truth, this was inspired by old-school RuneScape fashion. This means needing to grind out your smithing to keep unlocking access to higher levels of gear. Here's where I ended up in that endeavor. My plan was pretty much identical to the one used by Joov in his own video. Inside Halted Stream Camp on the outskirts of Whiterun, there is both a transmute ore spell tome, an alteration spell granting you the ability to turn a single piece of iron ore into silver, or silver ore into gold ore, and an absolute mess of iron ore to be mined by hand. The neat thing about gold ore is that 2 of them can be turned into 1 ingot, and 1 gold ingot can be turned into 2 rings, which is a pretty prime, although admittedly very slow to prep, method for leveling smithing. Because transmute ore has a pretty hefty magicka cost at low levels, I could only really use it once before needing to let most of my magicka regenerate, and with my backpack routinely filled with anywhere between 50 to 70 iron ore from all the mines I'd been hitting, this led to 2 different options. I could use the spell, wait for a single in-game hour, and then use the spell again, repeat, or I could just use the spell as I was walking around and traveling throughout the world, which is what I did. I still used fast travel when it made sense, but for the first time, this sort of interaction is what got me invested in just walking around the game. Collecting flowers and transmuting ore. I never would have guessed, you know? But here I am on the other side. I've worked all the way up to 50 smithing on my current character, crafting and subsequently retiring older sets of iron, steel, and Dwemer armor, and I'm currently enjoying the benefits of a set of orcish armor that I made myself. And in doing so, I've developed a deeper appreciation for the world, both in wandering around to find the different mines in the game, and also just enjoying my time spent walking around it. And as a special bonus, I've also filled a chest with gold rings that I've made myself that are now just waiting for the chance to be enchanted. Which is kind of a difficult one, actually. Enchanting becomes an interesting system when viewed through this lens. The literal act of enchanting is already difficult with the restricted access to the soul trap spell and your only soul gems being those you can find in the wild, but with a rule set restricting access to enchantments to just those that can be taken from non-unique quest rewards, this turns the entire system into not just a reason to travel the land and complete quests for different factions and jarls, but it also turns it a bit into this casino minigame, I suppose. Every time I finished a quest that would give me an enchanted item, it was a genuine edge of my seat moment. Any one of these effects could seriously change the game for me, but if we're being honest, the excitement of getting a new enchantment often paled in comparison to the reality of the enchantment I did get. Sort of like how opening a loot box is more fun than the thing inside the loot box. Combined with how few chances the game actually gives you to get enchanted items with this rule set, I ended up not really thinking about enchantments all that much. In truth, I feel this rule set probably restricts enchantments more than I like, and so it feels that the benefits you would normally look towards enchanting for end up getting loaded onto alchemy. That said, it does turn the occasional miracle into this huge moment, like how the very first enchantment I got from Balgruuf was a smithing effect, even if I did die and lose it before I even got to use it. Despite my under-reliance on it for this playthrough so far, I'm still left with a newfound appreciation for it. Something that I typically take for granted now feels like a much bigger deal, and it still helped bolster my immersion in the game by encouraging me to pay more attention to quests and the people involved with them. I was already traveling the land so much to make other systems work, it only made sense to stop in at every new town and see what the local faction could potentially offer me. And honestly, it was still kind of fun, because it meant trying to find value out of things I wouldn't normally use, stuff like taking less damage from power attacks. In a game where there's dozens of ways to take damage, getting a reduction from just one of those doesn't feel phenomenal, but this isn't really a game mode about feeling phenomenal. This is a game mode about staying alive and doing what we can with the limited resources available in that regard. It's about the forced creativity of restricted options, and even if it wasn't my favorite part, I still think that's important. I kinda think that's what this was all about. Under the Ironman rule set, spells, magic, effects, whatevers, gain a whole lot of value, even on top of whatever they already had. Given the ability to remove the game's default starting spells, it means that the only spells we're able to use are from spell tomes we find in the wild. Real talk for a second? I think this is the best thing about this run. It got me thinking, it got me crafty, it got me working really hard to make the most of a limited resource without restricting access to that resource to such a degree that I just chose not to use it, and it got me pursuing new things to try and grow my magic skills. There are 3 main places to find these tomes. First, some just spawn naturally. Sparks can always be found in the Helgen dungeon, Transmute Ore always spawns in Halted Stream, if you go to Fort Amol you can always find Bound Bow. Alright, quick aside. In this rule set, if you want to use a bow, in general, you need to make your own arrows. And I ruled that you can't even get them back because that would count as looting a dead body. And so by making it expensive to play with a bow, and, strategically and purposefully avoiding bound bow, I feel like I've actually been enjoying a new playstyle where Stealth Archer just isn't mechanically viable. It's been really nice. Anyways, the second place to find spell tome would be in boss chests. At the end of most dungeons, you'll have a small chance of pulling a spell tome from one of these big chests. Cool stuff, and it really incentivizes that classic Skyrim experience of clearing random dungeons just to see what's on the far end, even if you can't use all the rewards, but it also tapers it by always keeping in mind how many of what kind of resource you're using to clear a dungeon. There is a solid risk-reward ratio to the magic gained and resources used in this game mode that I've never experienced before, and I've had a lot of fun with it. Finally, any mage-type enemies, people with stuff like Conjurer in their name, have a small chance of dropping a tome on death, and this was where it got really spicy. Fun fact, magic damage in Skyrim is not reduced by your armor, only magic resistance effects, which don't come native to most characters. This makes fighting a group of mages feel more akin to being stalked by raptors in this game mode. No joke, my first character died in 2 shots to a random event Atronach. Mages will shred you if you're not careful, but they're also your best bet at unlocking spells. The coolest thing this did for me in this game mode is it got me thinking about game mechanics in a way I never have. I know that lightning spells drain magicka, but I never cared about that unless it was happening to me. But with Sparks as my only damage spell early on, this build ended up developing into this really fun rush-down battle mage. where I could use my own spell to leave mages with no resources and then run them down with a sword the size of their body. Honestly, incredible gameplay. Spell tomes are rare, but it always felt great to win one from a mage. Now, I have been lying to you a little bit, because there's actually a secret fourth place for spells to be found. It requires access to the college, but it kind of changes everything. I kind of suspect that there's a decent amount of people who don't even really know that the Atronach Forge exists, and others that won't really know what it's good for. And a real part of that is that the Atronach Forge isn't really good for anything, at least not in a normal playthrough. The ability to create a Soul Trap spell tome, or the Book for Flame Atronach, is kind of a weird thing to be able to do here. You can buy those spells from vendors pretty early on in your journey. It's only in a playthrough like this where the ability to make your own spell tomes by combining the right ingredients really matters. As far as I'm aware, this right here is the only place in the entire game that you can get reliable access to the Soul Trap spell tome with this rule set. But the more important thing is that the Atronach Forge can be used to get enchantments. Now, this isn't in the rule set laid out at the beginning because I'm literally learning about it right now as I write these words, but it's an immediate amendment to the rule set because you can craft enchanted Daedric pieces at the Forge. We can't make weapons with this rule set because they require silver weapons as a component and those can't be crafted, but we can acquire all of the pieces needed to make enchanted Daedric armor, which I'm going to say we can disenchant. Because the main trade-off for that is that, you need 90 conjuration to make it work, since these recipes require the sigil stone. It certainly makes enchantments a bit more of an endgame thing, but that's also when you need them most. God, this section on magic is really starting to drag on. And speaking of dragons, shouts. I've never given a shit about them before. I will maybe fus or da a fella if it's convenient, or if I remember that I can, but I genuinely spend most of my playtime forgetting that the main snowflake mechanic of Skyrim even exists. But here, in this playthrough where magic is rare and trying to manage my magicka bar is important, holy shit, I am addicted to these words of power. You mean I get access to a massive pool of magical abilities with wild varieties and they don't even require the same resource as the rest of my spells? That alone makes these shouts worth literally any amount of effort to get them. For the first time in 13 years, I asked the Greybeards where I could find a new word of power and then went to find it. I am genuinely so hooked on this mechanic right now. Using Become Ethereal to overcome huge drops, using Unrelenting Force to use gravity to my advantage, using Flame Breath to put an enemy on the back foot before we rush in. I genuinely am at risk of making the call to go on some kind of Dragon Scholar pilgrimage to find every single word in the game. This is such a fun kind of magic, and I cannot believe it took me this long to use it, but I'm so happy that I finally am. And in fact, there's a lot of effects in Skyrim that kind of fall into this same category for me. Elements of this game that I really paid attention to that I normally would gloss over in my typical playthrough. Stuff like the standing stones. Typically, I would just pick one of these three that best suits the vibe of what I was feeling for any given playthrough and then forget about them. But here, I was actually strategically swapping out the stone I was using to better suit what I was doing. Like switching from the Mage Stone to the Lord Stone for its passive reduction to magic damage when I went to go take on the Potema questline, leading me to a dungeon full of mages. And while temporary swappable effects are cool, even cooler still are permanent ones. Fun fact, did you know that if you help the goddess Mara make some of her favorite ships canon, you can just get a flat 15% bonus to magic resistance? It's probably the first thing you should do in any playthrough in general, but it's also the kind of thing that matters way more here than it ever could, at least to me, in a normal playthrough. And on the basis of Mara and love, let's address marriage. Around day 3 of this playthrough, I casually mentioned to my audience that marriage would be a powerful tactical choice because we could turn the plus 10 bonus experience from Well Rested into a plus 15 bonus from Lover's Comfort that would also combine with our Guardian Stone, leading to a massive 35% increase to our gains for like 8 whole in-game hours. In my head, I saw efficient leveling and a strategic game plan to elevate the character, but what happened was a multiple stream, 15-hour battle in my audience over who the best marriage candidate is that involved multiple polls just to see who we would marry on this playthrough. And I actually can't put that person into the script because as I am recording this dialogue, I don't have a winner from those polls yet. Anyways, I married this person. on screen right now. They've probably moved in with us by this time, and so now we get a better resting effect when we go home. Speaking of home, building out your own home in Oldschool Runescape is a pretty massive deal. Player-owned homes have evolved over the last decade from vanity and socialization to perhaps the greatest source of efficient gameplay possible in OSRS. A well-made, effective home is the difference between the very best players and everyone else. So, in this game mode inspired by Oldschool Runescape, I was curious to see what value I could get out of a house. And the answer is sort of frustrating, because it's a lot, and not a lot yet. You see, by the time you're watching this, I've been working on this character for maybe 20 or 25 hours, assuming that I haven't died between right now and whenever you are. And the house still has a huge amount of work needed before it reaches its potential. So much theoretical value is just not there yet, but this little garden out here is one of the biggest investments I've ever made, because the wheat and blue flowers you can plant here don't just give 1 per harvest, they give 3 or 4 plant depending. Meaning that every time I came back to the house, I was able to collect enough ingredients to make another 12 potions or so, and at around 50 health each with my current alchemy level, that meant that every journey back to the house I was banking near 600 health. It was also where I finally hit a bit of a breakaway in terms of my collections and banked experience, since under this rule set, the inside of this home was the only place I could store items. It took nearly 10 hours to get to a place where my inventory and storage stopped being my pants pockets, and this unlocked so much potential. I had never really considered the ability to put an item away as anything special until it suddenly was. This box was the thing that allowed long-term planning to exist. I hadn't been looting dragon bones for hours because the ratio of immediate weight and inventory space consumed to the theoretical eventual payoff was so in favor of leaving them behind that I did that. But now, with this home, I have a growing stash of valuable components just waiting for me to finally hit 100 smithing somehow. And what I'm so excited for still is knowing that there's so much more. I can continue to build out this house, I can continue to make it better, I can continue to make it work for me, and I never think to do that in a normal playthrough because things like this just don't matter to me in a normal playthrough. One of the more subtle elements to Skyrim's landscape of mechanics is the way in which the world scales to your level. The higher your total level, the more dangerous bandits become. Dragons begin spawning in at higher tiers, you see saber cats instead of wolves, etc., etc. There are pros and cons to this system. The most basic pro for it is that it keeps the world feeling fresh. As you grow, the world grows too, so you never feel like you're just overpowering the game around you. The immediate downside of this, of course, is that what's the point of growing if you don't actually feel stronger, if encounters still feel largely the same because they've leveled up with you? I think it's worth saying that, at least for me, one of the best feelings in a game like this is getting to go back to a low-level starting area, the places where my journey began, and allowing me to see how far I have come. This playthrough refreshed all of my thoughts on this matter, and drove me a bit deeper into the idea of trying to get the most efficiency out of my levels, because the villains of this game don't care if I'm level 10 because I'm the smoothest talker with my 100 speech, or if I'm the most goodest hammer boy. They're going to swing at me just knowing I'm level 10. And that matters a lot for this kind of playthrough. Trying to keep in step with this world ended up being a way bigger part of my plan than I expected, to the point where I would actually leave behind leveling tomes if I suspected that they would give me a level in a skill I wasn't using. It also meant that anything I did use, I had to fully commit to. Using transmute ore to get gold also got me alteration levels, so it made sense to grab the Oakflesh spell tome from Iverstead. I was going to be getting levels from alteration either way, the world was going to be scaling up as a result of transmute ore, even if it was just in some small way, so I had to make sure I was getting lasting value out of that. I don't really know for sure what other people mean when they talk about Skyrim as immersive, but I think that this is my personal highlight when it comes to considering myself immersed in the game. Thinking about the experience and the systems within it to such a degree that I would turn down free levels and skills just because those skills don't fall into my overall plan for the character. Wandering around the world because it benefits me to do so, both to collect alchemy ingredients and spend the time transmuting, and specifically choosing a race for my character based on their bonuses and what I thought the most difficult part of the game would be under this rule set. And the real core reason I think for why these things worked was permadeath. You're so good at what you do! Ah! I knew it. I even knew it was coming. I had a hard time deciding if this should be the first point or the final point, because permadeath is the mechanic by which everything else in this game was given new value. This is the most important aspect of this game mode. When death is the end, you treat the game differently. Alchemy matters because I don't have healing spells, and I need to be able to push hard when needed to keep myself alive. Smithing matters because the game scales with me and I need to keep my defense growing to match the new enemies. Enchanting matters because I need every advantage I can get, even if it's small or requires that I play in a way I hadn't intended. Spells are now hyper valuable for being a reliable way to do damage at a distance, permanent effects help keep us alive, and even a 5% increase to the resting bonus gives us a more efficient way to use limited resources. Building out a home matters because it becomes a central hub that I don't want to lose. All of these secondary elements that I typically forego now orbit around and are given immense value by this dark star that is permadeath. There is an odd mix to the danger in Skyrim because it is both a game with an incredible amount of threats and very little consequences for succumbing to those threats. In fact, depending on the amount and types of resources you used in a dungeon, it might sometimes even be better to die, load back to before you use those supplies, and then try it all again. But if death is the end, and dying means deleting your save, suddenly the amount of attention I was paying to basically every other system in the game skyrocketed. I was keeping track of my banked health, I was managing the steroids I got from alchemy, I was specifically using a spark spell to help shut down mages by draining their magic, I was watching for what weapons NPCs were using, I was in deep. Nothing changed my perspective on Skyrim more than permadeath. And if you haven't tried it before, go boot up one of your 4 copies of Skyrim and just give it a few hours. Maybe set the difficulty 1 level higher than you're used to. I genuinely think it might surprise you. And the reason why it worked so well, I think, is that it was the metric by which every other element of this playthrough was given new meaning. And so if you don't totally enjoy it, consider trying out what I did. Sometime around day 4 of the stream I was doing for this footage, we had a death that was a real oopsie-daisy kind of moment. But myself and my audience had grown really attached to the character we'd been playing, so I took a vote and we amended the rules slightly. A cinematic, or properly thematic death was a permadeath. If it was cool, it counted. An oopsie-daisy death, on the other hand, prompted penance, leading to what my audience lovingly referred to as the woodcutter arc. Go to Whiterun, manually cut 100 firewood, and then make the trek to deliver that wood all the way up to the Greybeards. And what I found with this was that even though the penalty for an oopsie-daisy death wasn't a full reset, I still really didn't want to die in either case, which is all it took to get me to play the game with a focus on these secondary systems designed to keep me alive. Even with this slightly more casual view on death, I'm still actively engaging with this game and its world like I've never done before. I'm fully invested and I'm actively having fun. This system, this rule set, this game mode, whatever, is working in a way that I never could have predicted. It is changing my perspective in a way I didn't think possible. And what that means is that if you come to my channel on Tuesday, I will be streaming this character. Not because I need footage anymore, not because it means anything for any of my videos, but because I'm genuinely having so much fun with this game, with this rule set. I could be playing Space Marine 2, I could be out hiking, I could be reading or doing anything else, but right now, my whole hobby brain space is taken up by Skyrim, and the biggest realization of this is the newfound understanding that I'd been wrong about this game. Skyrim is a game with a lot of limitations and things that hold it back. I just never thought that I was one of them until now. I've always been someone who said and firmly believed that Skyrim was a good foundation, the caveat being that you need to conclude that foundation yourself, assumedly with dozens of mods to make a proper final product, and I think that's a pretty agreeable opinion. Because pretty much every other comment on my first Skyrim video, wherein we talk about the shortcomings of the combat system, is talking about like, just get mods, use mod, idiot. There are mods that fix this. But like, we're talking about Skyrim, not the aftermarket third-party add-ons you can get from Nexus. And it honestly blew me away that so many people didn't seem to get the difference between Skyrim and the mods people make for it. Using mods to fix Skyrim is such an inherent thing that it seems like a huge portion of the player base have just forgotten that mods aren't Skyrim. No joke, I had people during my stream ask what mod I was using for the Ironman challenge itself, as if it didn't occur to some people that this whole playstyle was just a thing I was doing. What I realized here, with this challenge run, is that Skyrim is a good foundation. But just by changing up the way I play it, the way I view the game, the way I choose to interact with it, it can become a whole new experience. Skyrim doesn't need mods in the same way I always thought it did. I still think the game benefits from them. I mean, come on over here, peek at your second monitor for a minute and look at this footage. I'm clearly using mods, but most of them right now are visual or immersion-centric. I'm basically just using 2 mods that actually affect the systems of the game exclusively to mold Conjuration a bit more to my tastes. I'm at a point where I know that Ordinator exists, that things like Adamant and Wildcat exist, that there are full massive reworks to Skyrim's base system, but I just don't care about them right now. And I'm not saying you shouldn't use those mods. Skyrim is a great foundation, finish it however you like. What I'm saying is that I think it's so cool that I don't feel the need to use those mods as much right now. I'm currently having the most fun I've ever had with this game, and I love that the most fun I've ever had playing Skyrim is just playing Skyrim. This video is a part of an effort I'm making to get some content backed and queued up for YouTube, so hopefully the algorithm won't notice or mind if I step away for a little bit. Ideally, nothing should change with my schedule. I'll be back soon, I'm just taking some time away. This video was also a real blast to make. I'm really enjoying Skyrim, and Skyrim is also a game that's easy to get fun footage for. I'm having a good time being back here. As always, this is where I get to give a massive thank you to all of the people on Patreon who have made the jump to help directly support myself and the work I do on this platform, with a very special thank you to my executive funders, Daddy Biscuit 22, Jordan, Device MD, and New Kind of Tired. These 4, along with everyone else, are a huge part of me getting to make the content I want to make. If you want access to that content early, ad-free, want to see your name in the credits, or just support the content you enjoy, consider following the link and seeing if there's a tier that works for you. Thank you.